So welcome to all participating, and thank you for attending this presentation about counting butterflies in urban and rural areas. My name is Guy Peer. I'm a conservation biologist. I'm situated in iDiv, which is the German Center for Integrative Biodiversity Research, as well as the UFZ, which is Helmholtz Center for Environmental Research. I'm leading the working group on agriculture and ecosystems at the Department of Biodiversity and People. And today what I want to talk to you about is basically about this question of why are we counting butterflies? Why are we doing that in urban and rural areas? And what do we want to achieve by calling volunteers to join us? If there are any questions later on, there will be a time for discussion as well. So we all have a strong reaction when we see butterflies. They're really affecting us and they're emotionally very close to us. We all like butterflies, and everybody participating today obviously does that, first of all, because we like these creatures. And butterflies, as we all know, are insects. And as most of us probably know, we're basically losing them, like we're losing many components of biodiversity. We're losing birds, butterflies, flowers. We're losing the landscapes that we used to know many years ago. And among the biggest drivers of these losses are urbanization and the expansion of monocultures, agriculture, including the intensive way that we're managing the land. These are not the only causes, of course, there are climate change and other causes. But today I want to focus on these two drivers of loss, because these are also the two areas where we can do the most to change this situation. So in Europe, where we are talking about at the moment, there are a lot of policy developments trying to halt the losses of biodiversity. There's the biodiversity strategy for 2030. And as of last year, the summer of 2024, we have a new regulation, which is the nature restoration regulation. And there are many implications of this regulation, including for agricultural areas, for urban areas, with the attempt to improve the status of existing natural areas, semi-natural areas, for agricultural areas, and also for the main policy in Europe for agricultural areas, which is the Common Agricultural Policy, because obviously this is the biggest instrument to help farmers and to determine in a way what they're doing. And within the Common Agricultural Policy, there will be the impact of the nature restoration regulation now, because butterflies have been listed as one of the indicators for the state of biodiversity. But agricultural areas are huge, and that means that if we want to know how the policy or how agricultural areas are affecting butterflies, how the measures we're taking in urban areas are affecting nature, then we want to collect a lot more data so that we can connect the measures that we are seeing with the outcomes. And if a city is investing in the green areas within this area, we want to see that it has an effect. So how do we do that? For that, often we need volunteers. We need what we call citizen scientists. And this is what we do in two projects in urban areas that I will tell about in the beginning, which is VielFalterGarten and Urban Nature Plans, or Plus, or UNP Plus. So what I'm going to tell before I get to the project is the protocol within the urban areas, and later on I'll explain how it works for the farmland areas. So the idea of the 15-minute protocol is based on an idea that was produced or developed by Romain Julliard already in 2005 in France, and that was part of the French Garden Biodiversity Observatory. And the idea is simply to go to a place that you like, which would be your garden or a park where you usually sit. That will be your favorite place. Then if you visit it a lot, then you can do observations there. You'll need to download the app. If you're anywhere in Europe, you can download the Butterfly Count app. In Germany, we also have the VielFalterGarten app. Then we ask people to register the site. So it's not just randomly collecting data someplace, but in a certain site. And once you're doing that with the app will ask you a lot of questions about your site so that we know more about the quality, what is in there, if pesticides are being used, etc. And then the 15 minutes start. And when you start these 15 minutes, the idea is to try and identify all the butterflies you see. And if you're a complete beginner, it will start with just seeing whites or yellow stuff or orange, and that's also fine. So you'll need to try to observe them to the best you can. And if they're just flying quickly, you'll not manage. If they land on a flower or they do something that you can take a picture, then you can do that. You can also pause the app during the time when you're spending to try to observe and identify them, and then continue on so that you have 15 minutes of searching and learning. And then whatever you observed, you upload, and then we can see also what you received. And by that, slowly, you become an expert of your own site because you get to know the butterflies that occur in your place. So if you visit in April or in May or in August, you'll see different stuff and different species occurring. And that's why we are proposing to try to visit every 2 weeks, or at least as a minimum 3 visits within your site. And that might be sufficient for us already to derive something like how many species you have or how many individuals. That means if you haven't seen anything, this is also important information. Upload your data, and we have them. And by that, we already start working together and learning together about your site and trying to also validate and help you with these data later on. So as I mentioned, the protocol is existing for a reason, and the reason is that we want to know more about how to improve the habitats for both people and for nature. In VielFalterGarten, we started in 2020 with the idea of educating people, of doing citizen science together with people, protecting and improving habitats in the city of Leipzig, and network with each other. And the idea is that there are 2 main measures that we can take. Either we just observe the butterflies, or we observe and we improve the management of our garden or park, or people just improve the management, but then they might not report, in which case we don't know how it affected the butterflies. So optimally, people participate in both, but for many purposes, having your observations will already be quite a lot. So originally, VielFalterGarten started as a collaborative project between UFZ, iDiv, where I reside, BUND, which is Friends of the Earth Germany, and the city of Leipzig. And it is continuing still as an initiative since 2024, when the funding was over, but it continues also through the UNP Plus project that I'll tell about soon. Just to give you a feeling of how it looked like, we started with COVID and just a few people collecting, mostly within our own team, and we had to develop the website, the app, and the materials. But by the end of the project, we already had 800 people that registered, or at least registered their interest in the project, more than 300 sites, and more than 1,200 observations that people reported during this time. And the numbers continue to increase over time. So current status is that there are over 1,000 people that already participate in the project in one way or the other. But among these, of course, not everybody is counting, and of course not regularly, but we've reached about 160 people that collect observations. And although the majority of those people are beginners, we were very impressed to see how people with just open eyes see a lot of stuff. And when they take pictures, we can see that they really see and observe rare butterflies, at least in Leipzig. They observed, in fact, 44 different butterflies, including many of the groups of what you call Zipferfalter, hair streaks, which are pretty rare in Leipzig. And we were very impressed to see that people noticed them, observed them, and we could also see increases in some species that were really rare in the beginning, including within parks where the management was improved. Now, we also checked whether scientifically this is really helping us, and we could see this was the work of Andrea Börmann, a PhD student with us, and she could show that there is a gradient when you go in and out of the city, where you have less and less species inside town. This is the distance from inside to the outside of city, and you can see that there are less butterflies as you go into town, but still, you still have areas with quite a lot of butterfly species, even within the city. And we also could see which are the factors explaining the butterflies and abundances that we've seen in different sites. So how many host plants there are, like the plants from which the butterfly larvae are feeding, cover of scrubs, but of course also the management of the sites, especially mowing is quite impactful. Now, within UNP Plus, we are continuing this process which we started in Leipzig, experimented with it, and we would like to expand this experiment, partly because we want to see what happens in other cities, and partly in order to learn and to work with you. That's also why you see that a lot of people are participating today, for instance, from Belgrade, which is one of the 3 cities where we are trying to establish monitoring. The city of Mannheim joined in 2024. The city of Belgrade is trying to join, hopefully 25 now. The city of Burgas is still in discussions with the hope to start soon. In Barcelona, they've already started in 2019, actually, but they do mostly transects and not what we call point counts or local observations. And we are still in discussions whether they might expand also to do these kind of local scale observations. And in Paris, obviously, they're already doing it for many years. So the cities of Paris and Barcelona are, in a way, lighthouse cities in the project. And in UNP Plus, the idea is to improve urban nature plans, so improving planning and making green areas of high quality accessible to as many people as possible. But what does high quality mean? In order to evaluate the quality, we need an indicator, and the butterflies could be one of the indicators to the quality of the green space. That's why we are starting this campaign. This is why we prepared a lot of materials which we can download from the UNP Plus, from the VielFalterGarten, but materials that we can also send you, including protocols. We're currently developing also a flyer, which we can translate to more languages. And of course, an important process is to have the materials for beginners to get to know the species, but there's a lot of materials from Project ABLE and Spring, the projects to expand EBMS or to expand butterfly monitoring schemes in Europe, which Milos can tell you more about for Serbia, and Andras can tell you more in Hungary. So we know that there are a lot of materials from former projects. So the question you might ask yourself now is, where would you like me to count butterflies? And the answer is not just everywhere, but this year we're trying to collect data particularly from pairs of places, which I would call measure versus control. So the measure will be when we are improving the management of a certain site, especially, for instance, if you reduce the mowing regime and you mow only once or twice a year, optimally if you mow only half of the area and not the entire area in one go, or you're stopping to use, of course, pesticides, but also planting of hedges or other measures, or flower strips, for instance, could bring a lot. And that's one example of a measure. Of course, if you know that the measure was implemented, it would be very useful to come to the city or to other people that you know and ask at which year was it implemented, so that we have baseline information about whether this measure is new. Is it from 2023 or from maybe 2015? Because the assumption is that the quality of the habitat often increases over time, and that means also more butterflies or more butterfly species. And the control will be a site where nothing has changed. So for instance, if it's still an intensely used park where it's mowed quite frequently because people don't want to sit on high grass, it's obvious that people will prefer to sit when it's mowed and convenient to sit and put a blanket and do their picnics on. Completely legitimate. So how does it look like in our site selection in Germany? In Leipzig, for instance, we're currently preparing and starting our campaign for data collection. So what you can see here in red is marked area where the city of Leipzig implemented flower strips already in the year 2019. That means before our project started. So we have a reference point where we know that they improved the management already 6 years ago. And then the control will be the rest of the Rosenthal Park area. So we can lay an area of 25 on 20 meters, or if the flower strip is longer, for instance, 50 on 10 meters in that case. And the idea would be to have more or less 500 square meters. If it goes a bit beyond or below, no problem. The app also recalls and records when you are doing your observation what your area of observation is. So don't worry that you need to mark and be very, very strict on the area. And yeah, while you're going 15 minutes and walking around the place, you can walk back and forth in this area. You can walk slowly, looking down, looking up, and trying also to avoid counting the same butterfly more than once. So if you're not sure, then just count the maximum number of butterflies that you've seen from a given species in a given time. So if you've seen a white, you don't know what exactly it is, then don't count every white anew, but try to write down, okay, I think I've seen 3 of them, and likely you've seen either Pieris rapai or napi, so either the small cabbage white or the green veined white. These are the very common species, relatively small whites. Okay, now continue with this example of what do we define as a measure versus control, and to demonstrate another park and demonstrate also that it's not always that intuitive, so you don't need to feel like you have to know exactly what measure it was. So this is an example in Johanna Park and Clara Zetkin Park, which are very long-term established parks, also from a biodiversity perspective. So again, you see the red marks for the areas where blue flower strip were laid in 2019. But they've also laid another area where they brought seeds from outside and they sowed the area with seeds from a relatively rich prairie outside of Leipzig, and they enriched the grass. In that case, we have a second measure. And they also have another area, which is more of a control number 2, where it's not just a lawn, but high grass. And this area is used as high grass for many, many years, actually tens of years, where they are still letting the grass grow very high, very homogeneous, but this is a different control in this sense because nothing has changed in the last years. So here we are going to start counting again as well in order to compare the different sites. And if we don't know, we just count in another site. No harm is done. We will be able to hopefully analyze what are the differences between different sites. And the more sites we have, the more we will be able to tell what is the difference in terms of size, in terms of management, and time since implementation. So some tips for yourself how to select sites once you're looking for areas. As I mentioned, it will be absolutely fabulous if you can select 2 sites. One would be control, one measure. If you have the time for only one, that's also fine. Do try to select sites. If you select 2 sites, do try to make sure that they are more or less similar. For instance, if you're 10 meters from trees, it will look very different than if you're in a complete lawn. So the other site should also have 10 meters from trees or hedges. The other rule is to try to avoid, if you take 2 sites, if you take one, as I said, it doesn't matter, but if you take 2 sites, at least 50 meters between them, even 100 meters as a minimum, and up to 500 meters, so that we have some similarity between the 2 sites, but also that they're not too close, because otherwise the butterflies will fly from one place to the other, and obviously you'll be counting more or less the same. This is called pseudo replications, like as if you're counting more or less in the same site. But still, it might be that you don't have a control, and that's also fine. The more sites and people we have, the merrier it will be, and the more we will be able to analyze this data. So for those who are completely beginners and are volunteers, for those of you who don't know butterflies, don't get stressed about whether your selection was correct or incorrect, or whether you identified all butterflies. What we try to say is that every site matters and everyone counts. That means you count and every butterfly you see counts for us. So just try and see, try to learn with us and we'll learn with you. And also don't shy away to simply try to observe in different sites. And if you see that you don't manage to come back, it doesn't cause us damage. We will see that you didn't manage to see more than one visit. So we will select those sites where at least 3 or 4 visits were done. But of course, it will be good to go out in good weather conditions, like after 10 o'clock in the morning, before 4 o'clock in the afternoon. This is usually quite good times, without clouds above 17 degrees. And if it's not very windy. If it's very windy or cloudy, and if you feel that it's cold, if you don't see butterflies flying around, this is probably a sign that this is not an optimal day. But in all other conditions, if you're in good weather and you don't see butterflies, still do report, and we will see that you've seen nothing, because this is also important in some sites. Yeah, so these are the most immediate tips. And as I mentioned, we're interested in collecting the data not only from urban areas, but also from farmland areas. I mentioned the Common Agricultural Policy. I mentioned farmland areas. And here I wanted to tell you about 2 projects, actually, not just one, but 2. One is the project CAP4GI. CAP stands from the Common Agricultural Policy, and CAP4GI, GI stands for Green Infrastructure. So the idea is to ask, how can the CAP do better in promoting green infrastructure in green areas, places where the farm management has been improved, where we have more hedges, more landscape features, and how can we help also farmers that are implemented good measures to benefit from that? Because it's not about the win-lose, but rather how can we generate win-wins between farmers, nature, and society in this sense. And this is a project that has been running now for 3 years. Actually, it's officially over as of 30th of April, with several institutes participating. It was led by Adelphi, and with several practice partners in Thuringia and in Baden-Württemberg in Germany. And UFZ was one of the partners, also University of Rostock. And we had 6 different areas within Germany where we have a lot of contacts with farmers, and where we tried to collect data also on what is happening on their farms. The other project is Agroecology-TRANSECT, where again we're asking now how to expand those good practices that we know of, or actually how can we expand agroecology, which is more of a broader philosophy of improved management, improved value chains, not only better production, but also consumption of products that promote each other. And basically, we're trying to ask, how can we expand good agricultural practices? How can we expand agroecology as a concept? And again, if we want to expand something, we want to see that it works. And if farmers are investing in doing something better, exactly as I said before about cities, then they want to also show that they do something good for the environment. And again, butterflies can be one very important indicators for that. And particularly now that the butterflies are officially an indicator within the nature restoration regulation, then the question is, how can we look at so many measures, so many areas that we have? About 50% of Europe are agricultural areas, so many different types of farms, of crops, of measures that could be taken to improve across different bioclimatic regions in Europe. And so for that, again, we will need more and more people and data, especially where we know what measure was taken and seeing whether it had an impact on butterflies. In Agroecology-TRANSECT, we have 11 so-called innovation hubs or case studies, among them in Slovenia, in Bulgaria, Hungary, in the Netherlands, Belgium. Not all will automatically participate, but hopefully at least 5, 6 will participate in France and Bulgaria, but also in Hungary. People have already started, at least as a pilot, to collect some data. Now, how does it look like when you go out to the field? This is an example from the masterwork of Lea Kahun, who went out and started collecting data on butterflies in agricultural areas within the CAP4GI project. These are some pictures directly from the field, and you could see that she also measures microclimate. The white thing that you see that it is stuck in the ground is measuring, is basically a data logger that measures soil temperature and moisture. And at the ground level and above ground level at about 10 centimeters, we are also measuring temperature. If anybody is interested in receiving such data loggers, please let us know, both for rural and urban areas. We have another protocol of how to do that. So with a lot of efforts in her master's, she managed to visit twice during the season and visit 52 sites, a lot of traveling around, because as you know, in farmland areas, the fields might be very big. And this is actually pretty limited about how many sites can you visit and whether you can get enough data to answer whether, for instance, fallow land is a lot better than rape seeds, or whether wheat is, the edge is richer than the field itself. And so it was obvious to us that with those amounts of data, you can have very limited amount of capacity to answer these questions. Now, we expect that we will have more butterflies on the edge versus in the field. But again, if you cannot see that, that's partly because we need a lot more data to answer these kind of questions. In 23, we tried to paid volunteers as a small incentive to visit the sites, and we managed to come to 5 regions. But still, if we want to expand that to so many sites and regions, then the approach we're trying this year is to expand the call, to expand the number of volunteers. And again, everybody matters. Everybody who has interest or have friends or family or people that you know in farmland areas, or takes walks within farmland areas because they live in a rural area, then that will be highly welcome. Now, based on the experience also of Leah and what we did in agricultural areas, we expanded the protocol a little bit and updated it from the urban areas to rural. And what we do in these areas is that, again, we're trying to fix the area, but here we're slightly more strict. In urban areas, sometimes if you have a garden, it's very difficult to get an area of 500 square meters. In farmland, it's easier. And partly we wanted also to make it coherent with transects that are being walked. This is why we have the option of 5 on 100, which was basically the same as 2 sections of a transect for those who know the butterfly monitoring scheme transect methods, or 10 on 50 if it's a flower strip. And if we have an edge between 2 habitats, we will very much appreciate if you do half of your time on half of the habitat and the other half of your time on the other. Meaning, for instance, if you have rapeseed versus grassland, for instance, then you spend half of your time on each of the 2. Or if you have a very, very narrow flower strip, then you walk inside the flower strip for half your time and outside within the other half of your time. Yeah, and again, the same procedure as I mentioned earlier to register the site. In that case, you'll need to register the site if you're in Germany within CAP4GI. If you are in other countries, then within Agroecology-TRANSECT. In both cases, we will be able to find the data, so you don't need to worry that you might be confused about the 2 projects. And again, the task is pretty simple. Try to count all the butterflies you see and identify them to the best that you can. And again, optimally try to visit every 2 weeks. And because sometimes it's very difficult to visit agricultural areas, we know that in farmland areas also farmers are very, very busy in this season, then optimally it will be sufficient for us if you visit, especially between middle of June and middle of August. If you're a bit more south in Europe, you need to start middle of May till middle of July. But we would appreciate at least 2 or 3 months of relatively condensed observations where the 3 visits are done. So if you need to take out some observations, then at least concentrate in this period in order to make sure that we have a condensed period with data. How does it look like in reality? These are examples from a small village in the west of Germany where we visit quite often. It's the village of Homburg in Nordrhein-Westfalen in the west of Germany. And here the measures that I decided to focus on in this case to control for measure versus control is an area here where they restored the habitat and actually converted it back from arable to grassland, and they made it into basically an orchard. You can see that they planted some trees, they restored the grassland, and the comparable area that I've chosen in that case is a monoculture. Of course, in 1 year it will be different than the other, and this year I've chosen to do my observation in a site which is, at the moment at least, half rapeseed and the other half is wheat. And then I selected this 20 on 25 meters and spent about 15 minutes. You might be surprised, but even in such an area which is a monoculture, you do see butterflies, and sometimes even relatively rare butterflies. For instance, here you can see that there's a small cabbage white, which is of course a very common butterfly, flying over the wheat. You can see on the rapeseed the peacock butterfly, which is pretty common and coming to nectar or to put their territory in there and wait for the next individuals. But also the map butterfly on the right side, Halle-Jena-Leipzig, which is not very common. It's usually a forest species or forest edge species. But if the distance to the field is not too large, then suddenly you see them flying around in a monoculture. So there are surprises, and often it's nice even to see that it's not necessarily as empty as one might worry about. So as I mentioned, we would like to have 2 sites, and especially for agricultural areas, because finding volunteers is very difficult. If you already are volunteering, it will be great if you manage to do at least 2 sites. And in that case, we usually say edge versus center. So the edge of the field versus the center as the control, minimum of 50 meters into the field, and at least 100 meters from your control to the measure, and up to 500 meters if possible. If not, don't worry, every site matters. And as I mentioned, consider the same habitat more or less. And we are trying to focus also in terms of crops, because we cannot cover all the crops in Europe. So we are particularly interested in grains such as wheat or rye, rapeseed, corn, but also grasslands, be it intensively managed or extensive or fallow land, which is of course very important for many species, but there are also different types of fallow lands. Flower strips, I forgot here in the list, but of course they're also very important for us, often as the edge of the field. And then when you come to the edge, it could be flower strip in the edge, or hedge, or without the hedge, or with trees or without. And obviously we will need more and more people the more the number of measures are increasing. So this is why we need you, and why the tips for yourself if you're volunteering will be that, again, every site counts and everyone counts. So each count that we get we'll be very happy about, especially if you manage to come back to the same site. Don't forget the farmers own the area often, or they are managing the area, and they don't appreciate if somebody just walks into the field without mentioning. So if you did not know who the farmer is and you want to count because you live in this area, then better stay at the edge, and then do consider, for instance, the other alternative is what you call a BMS or a transect, which you can walk along the route, and then you'll need to have at least several sections of 50 meters each, and a minimum of 2 such sections will be the same as doing a count of 15 minutes. So either you do a long walk, for instance, if people walk their dog or do something else, the option, of course, exists to come back to the system of a butterfly monitoring scheme. That is the way that people do the observations throughout Europe. This is the more established way. And again, don't forget to upload your data, or don't get shy and think, okay, I haven't seen anything. It was not good weather. It does happen in some areas that you don't see anything. Especially, by the way, in the middle of June or beginning of June, often there's time between the first and second generation of many butterflies, and then suddenly people report 0 butterflies. So don't get stressed about that. We are hoping to reach at least 15 sites for each of the measures that we're looking at. That would mean 15 plus 15 as a control. So at least 30 sites for a given bioclimatic region and a given measure. That's why we need each observation that you can think of. And our main countries of interest at the moment are particularly Bulgaria, Hungary. In France, people are collecting data within the Innovation Hub, but we are hoping to expand a little bit. In Germany, as I mentioned before, Serbia, Slovenia, and we are hoping that additional people also in the Netherlands and Spain might join us. But with that, we'll be very happy already with the countries that I mentioned earlier. And to that end, we updated the Butterfly Count app. So if you already have it and you've used it before, then you probably have noticed that there's an option of registering the project, registering the site. If you don't register the project, I will never be able to see your data. If you are somewhere in Europe, it will be difficult to find where your data are. So please don't forget to register your observation into a project and a site. There are also, as I mentioned, downloadable materials, and they will accumulate over time, as we hope. The protocol is already on the website of Agroecology-TRANSECT in the news section on butterfly survey. And we are preparing also reporting sheets. Some we have already prepared with pictures of the common butterflies, and others, for those that don't have it for their area, might need to still use an empty sheet, but your butterfly monitoring scheme coordinators are more than happy to help you with the materials that exist from other projects. And we're also preparing a flyer, which we know that is very useful if you want to give it as a handout for people that you meet and want to tell them about this. Then you need something at hand that looks good. So within a few days from now, there will be also a flyer telling about Agroecology-TRANSECT, CAP4GI, and the farmland monitoring, or at least farmland survey that we want to run. We will very appreciate if you help us with recruiting people and finding people. So if you know of other friends, do talk to them. If you're active in social media, then please do follow us, help disseminate the call, help us finding your own way also of communicating, because usually people follow within their own language, own country. So the more people are doing that and serves as ambassadors, the more we will be able to expand this effort. So do help us, join us in involving other volunteers. Tell them about this project and efforts. Especially, we are very keen to involve farmers where possible, NGOs, others, and tell us what you need from us, where we can help you, help us, and how we can all work together for that. And also your feedbacks to us are, of course, very welcome. With that, I thank you for your attention. I stop sharing. Again, I would like to acknowledge the funding for VielFalterGarten. It was the BFN for UNP Plus. This is an EU Horizon Europe project. CAP4GI was funded by the Ministry of Education of Germany, BMBF, and Agroecology-TRANSECT again is funded by the EU Horizon Europe project. So first, thank you very much for listening up to that point. And for those of you who are beginners and want to learn also a little bit about butterflies, what I want to share now is the story of a few species. Now, the picture you see here is a beautiful poster. Actually, the quality here is not very high, unfortunately. But this is a poster which was prepared by the Butterfly Monitoring Scheme coordinators in Germany, or what you call Tagfalter Monitoring Deutschland. And here you see all the species of Germany in one go. This is about 140 species that you see here. And what I like in this picture is that it's very colorful. It's full of stuff, but this is diversity in itself, but it doesn't help us understanding diversity. So understanding diversity requires knowing species and knowing their story. And the idea is it's exactly like with humans, everyone shares their own story. So what I want to share with you is the story of a few butterflies, just to get you the feeling of why is it so important for us also to get people counting, but also learning about butterflies. And the most important thing about butterflies, of course, is first of all, that they spend most of their time often as larvae or as eggs. So we need to think about their entire life cycle. They have the egg. Out of the egg, there's a tiny larva that is hatching. In that case, we are seeing the developmental stages of what you call the Seefalter or the comma butterfly. They feed on nettle in this case, as many butterflies are feeding on nettle. And they have to pupate by hanging themselves from above. That means that they cannot escape as pupae. So if we cut the vegetation or cut the nettle while they're developing, we already lost them. Many of the species that develop on nettle are actually overwintering as adults. So what is most important for us to note? First of all, what they feed on as larvae. The second is how many generations they make. In the case of the comma, for instance, they make several generations a year. But the other thing is how do they overwinter? And in that case, as adult. That means if we cut the nettle over winter, it's not that bad, for instance, because they're not there. But then when we want to select different butterfly species to help people learning about butterflies, we can also select different butterflies that tell us different stories about different habitats. So the idea is that you can select a butterfly, like in that case, orange tip, or the brimstone, or in that case here, the peacock, the brimstone. And we do that with schools or kids in kindergarten even, and we teach about each butterfly at a time. And as I mentioned earlier, once you tell the story of one species, for instance, the comma, then immediately people learn, okay, this is the measure we would need in order to save the butterflies. So the red admiral, for instance, lays their eggs as well, just on nettle. And if you see here, this closed leaf, this is the leaf that was closed by the larva because they don't want to be seen. So you might actually waste your time if you're looking for the larva of the butterfly. You need to look, in that case, for closed leaves, and they're inside. So if you see closed leaves on your nettle in your garden, then consider not cutting them. That was really quick narrative for one species. Another example is the brimstone. In Southern Europe, you actually have another type of Organopteryx cleopatra, the Cleopatra brimstone, which has also a bright orange. The male is yellow, the female is actually white from the upper side and green from the underside. And they live a full year from beginning to the end of their lives. And they lay their eggs on buckthorn or alder. These are hedges, basically, or forest species. So if you cut your hedges all the way during the time when the birds are not there, you still may lose the butterflies. In that case, they overwinter actually as an adult, but still the larvae need to feed from the fresh leaves. So it's really important not to cut down the hedge completely and just leaving some areas uncut. In that case, if you manage the hedges better, especially in farmland areas, you'll see beautiful butterflies like the black-veined white, or Celastrina agiolus, so many other butterfly species that feed on hedges. So what you've seen that I've done is to very quickly go through the life history of species and then through that immediately to the conservation measure. For hedges, we often give another example like the brown hairstreak or other hairstreak species because they actually overwinter and over summer as eggs. So they lay their eggs in summer, they have only one generation a year, and the egg stays on the branches or in the meeting point between branches all the way until spring of the next year. That means that if we cut it in October or in March, it doesn't make a difference. The egg will still be dead if we cut or lost if you cut all the hedge too much to the bottom and too early in the season. That's why you need to protect the hedges, or at least not cut everything in the same go. So for instance, cutting only 50%. When it comes to meadows, we usually give 2 or 3 examples because different meadow species will require different subhabitat. So for instance, the common blue, the male is blue, the female is brown from the upper side, and both of them have these points on the other side. And they lay their eggs on many different species of the Papilionacea species, so Trifolium species and others. But the important thing is that Trifolium, for instance, will not grow if everything is grassy. So the idea is to know that actually mowing might be very important, or grazing, but not all the area in one go, or at least not too intensive grazing. And then always we come into the question of should you mow or should you not, and when should you mow? And there is no optimal time because it depends on which species you are asking. So for instance, the schachbret, the marbled white, they need actually long grass and they would drop their eggs from above. The larvae will sleep immediately. They hatch and then immediately go to sleep under stones or within the vegetation, and then will feed only in the next spring. So in that case, not cutting at all, at least 10-20% of the area, leaving the grass long. You need to leave it until at least summer of the next year so that they complete their development, because the larvae will feed on the grass of the next year. So if we understand the different species, even within a meadow, need different subhabitats, we already learned a lot about how to shift from Rasen or from intensely used grassland to prairies or to meadows. And these are just some examples. The swallowtail actually overwinter as a pupa. They have several generations per year, and they live on fennel. They develop the larvae. They develop on fennel or other like wild carrots or normal carrots. But then also the pupa need to be considered as well, because if you cut the dead material in winter, then you lose the pupae on the vegetation, and the same goes for many other butterflies that overwinter as pupae. Same goes for the famous orange tip. They have only one generation a year in spring, but then the pupa sleeps for about 10 months on the vegetation or other things. So again, if the fellow vegetation or the leftover vegetation next to road is removed, we lose the butterfly. So if you open a book or if you open the guidance material that you get in different languages, it doesn't matter. Most important things that I mentioned are what do the larvae feed on, in which habitats do they occur, which time of the year are they active, because not all butterflies are active at the same time. And if you manage to learn at what stage they're overwintering, then from here you would already know a lot about how to protect them. Yeah, with that, I stop the presentation.